Peter, Drew, thank you so much for joining us for this important conversation on water. Some would say it's the most important issue right now facing our city, even more so than city streets, right?
Right.
And so we have our team of meteorologists. They are also here joining us. They've been digging through the data for several months now. Meteorologist Alan Holt, Kristin Walla is here. And I want to dive right into this. The city recently updated its online dashboard to keep residents informed on the situation. One of the graphs that grabbed my attention is when our western supplies are projected to hit zero. How close are we to running out of water?
I would say the answer to that question, Bill, is we are not close in running out of water, but it is something that we're actually having to keep an eye on, because we have progressively seen worsening conditions in our water supply, especially on the Nueces River water supply, which includes Lake Corpus Christi and Choke Canyon. And so this new tool that we've developed over the last couple months that we presented at Council this week really shows our community the effect of not having rainfall. We're 100% dependent upon rainfall. And when we're not getting that rainfall, there are things that are happening. And so we want to be very clear that we are not out of the woods, but we also want to be very clear that we're working hard to make sure that we bring on some short-term water supplies until we get that permanent water supply solution that we have been talking about, which would be seawater desalination.
And there's no denying that the city has been actively seeking out those alternative water solutions. What specifically are some of those solutions, and are they for today or for the future?
Yeah.
I would say they're both. They're for today and they're for the future. We were just looking at yesterday a series of groundwater wells that we're installing in Nueces County. And these are groundwater wells that will provide a short-term solution for our water needs today and tomorrow. There's a potential that some of those groundwater wells could be utilized into the future as well. We're still working through some of those questions that we have in terms of opportunities to use those wells for a longer-term water supply. But the reality is that these groundwater wells, while they're certainly quantity is good, the quality is something that we're going to have to work on. But this is water that we believe is easy to attain or easier to attain, and it's something that we can use to provide us with that ability to leverage our needs for the short term.
And I have a lot of questions about desal. We'll get to those in a few moments. But some of the data our team has been looking at is the evaporation numbers and how much of the city's water supply is lost to evaporation versus consumption.
Evaporative loss is a huge part. When you're 100% dependent upon rainfall in lakes and rivers, you have a huge exposure to evaporative loss. And so there are times in the summer when we're seeing 150 million gallons a day of evaporative loss. That's actually more than our total water demand, treated and raw water demand of our entire city and the region that we serve. So evaporative loss is absolutely something that we think about. That's why I think it's really important to kind of talk about groundwater. Groundwater is underground, so you don't have evaporative loss. And then even seawater is a source of water that certainly has exposure to evaporative loss, but it's a much more sustainable long-term water supply that we feel provides more security for our community.
Peter, let me ask you about this, because other cities are looking at solutions as far as maybe solar panels over water.
Right.
Is that something that Corpus Christi has looked into?
We have looked into it a little bit, and we need to continue to look into it. Unlike other locations that have these solar panels over reservoirs, the ones we have seen, that application, the reservoir is a man-made, pretty much rectangular or square structure. What we have are lakes that are recreational, both Choke Canyon and Lake Corpus Christi, and so not only are they recreational for swimmers, for boaters, but there's property around the lake, so there's homes around the lake, so individuals have real estate leading up to the lake. So it's a little different scenario here than what we see in other parts of the country. But nonetheless, as Drew said, evaporation is significant. So this is something that's on our plans to look at to try to save that water so it doesn't get lost through evaporation.
Looking at a breakdown of who consumes our water supply, can you give us that breakdown, a summary, residential, business, industry?
I would say that we have a pretty unique community that we serve. And unlike many other cities in Texas, we do have a large industrial user part of our water supply that we supply water to. And so the industry that we serve, the large volume industry that we serve, is 50 to 60% of our total water demand. And then of course from there we have residential users that we serve, the residential community. We have commercial businesses. You would categorize them as restaurants and schools. And then finally we have wholesale contract customers that we serve. So these are entities that are outside of the city of Corpus Christi that we have contractual obligations to provide water to. These would be residential communities like Port Aransas. They would be communities like San Patricia Municipal Water District, who also does provide water to industry, but they also provide water to Rockport and Portland and other cities. So we're a regional water provider, and we have an obligation to provide water not just to our city, but to communities that depend upon us outside of our city.
Yeah, and Bill, it's important to highlight that. We were just up in Austin earlier this week testifying. So cities you drive through to get there, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, even Houston, where Drew was for a good part of his career, don't have this dual customer base. More than half of our water goes to large volume users, groups like Citgo and Valero refineries and other manufacturing. And so other cities in Texas don't have that. I think we're pretty unique. Even in Houston, where we know there's a big petrochemical industry, they take a lot of raw water and treat it themselves directly from sources there. So this is a very unique situation in Texas, and it's something that we have to deal with in messaging and making sure all customers really know the benefits, though, of large volume users because they pay a lot. They pay for water that they consume, and we just adjusted their rates so they're equitable now. And that helps to distribute the cost of fixed infrastructure like our treatment plant and our Mary Roads pipeline. So it's something that we talk about often because it's very unique. I think we're probably one of the only Texas cities that has that big dichotomy in customer classification.
You're updated on a lot of numbers that come in regarding our water supply. Does the city monitor inflow rate?
Inflow rain?
Rate.
Inflow rate.
Yeah.
We do. I mean, so one of the things that I think was really interesting this week was we talked at City Council actually about the USGS, United States Geological Service, that provides a host of gauges that we pay for, but are available publicly to the public to view. And so we know that the community is extremely interested in a lot of water information. And so that's out there. It's out there on public sites. It's on our website. And so we absolutely look at the inflows. In fact, one of the things that we mentioned at City Council this week, and we have a technical team, Corollo is the name of the technical team that's looking at this with us, but the inflows into both Choke Canyon and Lake Corpus Christi are at some of the lowest levels that we've ever seen. We know that the drought map that we showed at City Council this week shows some pretty dark reds, which are defined as exceptional drought in our watershed. So when you couple that drought and how that's depicted on these Thursday drought supply maps that we see with gauge data that's showing water is just not coming into those reservoirs, it translates into challenges in terms of what are we going to do when we don't have that water coming into these reservoirs and we're 100% dependent upon rainfall.
Now, you talked about drought, and while we are seeing a drought over our western watershed, it's not as bad as 2011, right? And our meteorologists are pretty passionate about the data they're looking at, that the drought we are experiencing in part could be argued that it's man-made. What are your thoughts on that? Have your views changed at all?
Well, I'll take that question and just tell you what from my vantage point, and I've looked at this and I have spoken to Alan a little bit, and I think what's important to say is that for Choke Canyon, the drought of record inflow was 461 acre feet. Inflow into Choke Canyon. Last year it was 432 acre feet. So there is clearly an impact of that rain, of that inflow, it is not making it in. Now, there's the other aspect of the precipitation. And we know that the drought monitor is clearly showing that there is a severe lack of precipitation. I know that this is an interesting conversation because we live in Corpus Christi, where this is not the watershed. So yes, it's probably rained, and it has rained more in Corpus Christi than where the actual watershed is. So I can see where there's a little bit of a challenge from our community, because they're going, hey, it just rained here and we got some pretty good rainfall. Or maybe it feels like it hasn't rained as much, but it's still raining. But in the watershed, I think we're seeing a different story based on what we're looking at on those gauges that we see.
This is where I'm going to chime in. Yeah, for me, where all of the drought the stuff started perking and piquing my interest was last spring, last summer. We were getting rain. We were above average through about September or October. We had like 26 plus inches. Average here is a little over 31. For the watershed, it's 20 to 30. We're in a rain shadow in the Sierra Madres. That's a desert out there in parts of the watershed. You're right about the northern part. The northern half of the watershed is really lacking in rainfall. But what prompted all of this conversation was last year, we're in summer, we're getting rain, we're all of a sudden at historically low levels in Choke, Lake Corpus Christi. And I said, what is going on? Something just isn't making sense. From the 10 years that I've been here, we'll get rains like this, the watershed will come up, it'll come down, it ebbs and flows naturally. So we started looking, like really probing. We used your pass-through reports to try and pull all of the inflow year by year back to 2010 so we could capture the 2011 drought. And we started seeing just this trend, right, over 14 years, 2010 to 2024, where the good years are great. We have several 100,000 acre feet of inflow coming in. The bad years are not great. The last two, right, Kristin, you pulled these. The last 2 years, we've only had, the inflow has been under 100,000 acre feet, and the evaporation on a year to year is over 150,000 acre feet. So we have a net loss before we even talk about consumption. And that has nothing to do with consumption, right? That's just lack of rainwater coming in. So when I look at it as a whole, and I see that we're operating, on this just very delicate balance where if we're not getting rain, we're going to be at this historically low level. To me, it screams more than just drought. It screams maybe overconsumption for what is a natural resource.
Yeah, well, we don't necessarily think that it's overconsumption. What those trends have showed is that while it does rain, it's not enough to replenish the reservoirs. And what we've talked about in recent weeks is really trying to understand the western reservoirs. And if you look over a 30-year period, as you have done and we have done, and then look at these last 14, 15 years, there's a significant difference. The 30-year average had some major rain events, hurricanes, tropical storms, that really helped to replenish those reservoirs, the western reservoirs. The small rain events that can, over a year's time, accumulate to 26 or so inches, they don't affect the rebounding or the rising of the waters in the reservoirs behind the dams. So what we haven't seen are these big recharge events that have helped us prior to this 15-year stretch that we're in. There's been some, but some of them have missed that recharge area. They've hit more Corpus Christi. So what we see is since 2011 or since the last significant drought, the western reservoirs have not rebounded. And so less water is coming in, less flow is coming in. Consumption is the same or a little bit higher than what it was over time. But what we need is these systems really work, and we don't talk about it much, but they really work best when they have a major rain event or back-to-back rain events that help to raise the water levels, and we just haven't seen that in recent times.
I'm going to just one more thing, because what you're saying is super accurate. When you look at the long-term trend of the combined level, you see the big spikes in the 90s were way up, and then after 2011, we're a lot lower. There's like a middle-of-the-road type of look to the graph. My question then, because we looked at all kinds of variables, we looked at percentage of average rainfall throughout the watershed, right? Up to Hondo, Carrizo Springs, Pleasanton, Three Rivers right there, direct deposit. And what we found, Kristin just took this project and gave it steroids, the percentage of average rainfall was between 80 and 100% dating back to 2010. So the question then becomes, if we're getting this 80 to 100% of average rainfall, right, is something else going on? Like, is that water getting diverted somewhere, or is it simply just the lack of the frequency of the rain? We get the big rain events, or are you saying that it only can get replenished if we get the exceptional event and not the average? The only way it happens is if we get the exceptional event.
Like a hurricane?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe not the only way, but the best way is a big rain event. That rain we had a few weeks ago, in the inner city was, some areas got 4 or 5 inches. It didn't, the reservoirs didn't rebound as much as we thought. They only went up 1%. And so had we had a second rain event like that, where the ground is now already saturated, the inflows would have been much greater. A lot of that rain didn't make it to the reservoirs because the ground is so dry, so it absorbed in. There was some inflow, but not as much as we had hoped for. And so those type of rain events are great, but we need another one almost back to back, maybe a third time. Then your inflows begin to happen if the ground's already saturated. And when you look at those graphs, those big hurricanes or tropical storms, that's what gives the big spike. And I think the community has been dependent on that. And so we are working on additional water sources. Our seawater desalination plant will be 36 million gallons. And the city knew this prior to 6 years ago when I first got here. And so finally we're in design right now. We're almost 15% design for that plant. But it's almost as if that plant really should have come online 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And it was slowed a little bit to get more community input. We do acknowledge we need more water sources. I think the persons prior to Drew and I being here and many city councils knew that.
This isn't a new thing. I mean, Choke Canyon was the same problem of the 80s. We're now just, catching up to that solution, and we've got to think another 50 plus years down the road. So that's where we're at.
Well, let me ask this, because you talked about consumption, and what is the city's current safe yield for water, and how does that limit or influence whether or not new industry comes to our area?
Yeah, Drew, I don't know if you, go ahead.
So I think a big part of what is drives people's interest in moving to a location is obviously water security, and so I think from our standpoint, we have water security when we develop additional water supplies that are not 100% dependent upon rainfall, and so I believe that, as Peter just described, the desalination plant, which has taken a little longer than perhaps some have wanted because of the community input, the regulatory process takes time. These are all the things that have to happen. And so I think that there's a lot of excitement in Texas because Texas is growing. A lot of people want to move here. There's growth here. There is growth in Corpus Christi. Maybe not the same growth that you'll see down the I-35 corridor, but I do believe that there are a lot of folks that are interested in locating here in the Coastal Bend. And so as we talk about developing these supplies like seawater, even groundwater, we think that having multiple sources of water beyond just seawater is the right approach. In fact, when we've talked to, and this is no surprise, but when we talk to other communities, California, Florida, where they have seawater desal, they also have reservoirs. And their message is, look, this takes stress when you have a seawater desalination plant or a ground. It takes the stress off your surface water supply reservoirs, and that's something that we're trying to communicate that, and we are communicating that to the community. There's folks that live on Lake Corpus Christi that enjoy that lake for the recreational purposes. They certainly don't like seeing water leaving the lake, and so our message when we talk to them is, hey, look, a seawater desalination plant puts less stress on this reservoir. It's not like we're not going to continue to use it, but it will allow that lake. And California is a little interesting. They say we let our reservoirs heal, we let them rest. Well, in similar fashion, that's what we want to do. We want to be able to have a diversified water supply by building these other assets so that we can take some of that stress off the surface water supplies.
But the city knows what the level is at, how much the population growth, the industry coming in. Y'all know that number of what we can use, right? Yeah. And so With the amount of rainfall and evaporation that affects our water supply, is the current water allocated, let's say to industry, sustainable, or does it need to be adjusted?
Like the amount that they use, is that what
Yeah.
you're saying, Bill? Well, put it this way, there's still some interest in industry starting new businesses here. But what we know today is that until we get our desal plant up and running in about 3 years from now, and until the reservoirs, western reservoirs, rebound, we're not signing anybody up. There's no new customers. Now, we know that they take 3, 4, or 5 years to build some of these facilities, so we are having conversations with some industrial potentials, but it's not for water today. It would be 3, 4 years from now. That question of firm yield, I think our benchmark is 80% of firm yield, meaning this is how much water we can always expect to have. So we've sold 80% of that. Right? That's the logic. So, but we're dependent on those 2 western reservoirs and to some extent the eastern reservoir as well. It's not drought proof, Lake Texana. So.
Let me ask this, because so many people are prone to blaming industry.
Right.
Is it fair to blame industry in this water situation?
I don't think it is. We know, and the industry's been here for a long time, for decades. And so our job as leaders in the city is to produce more water, is to develop more water systems. And in the 6 years I've been here, that's what we've been working on. In fact, one of my first meetings, I think it was actually the first meeting, was with Fries and Nichols, our engineer of record, for the desal plant. And so that first meeting was on seawater desalination. We've continued that over the 6 years. As Drew mentioned, we're looking at 2 big groundwater projects that could combine produce 50 million gallons of water. And we're bringing in more water from our Mary Rose pipeline. The first time ever, we've increased water production through there by 74% since last June. We've almost doubled the amount of water coming through the pipeline by investing time, investing good talent, in studying the pipeline, and then putting in infrastructure that wasn't put in when they built the pipeline initially. And so that's a tremendous amount of water we're bringing in now. That is our primary source of water, is coming in from the East Texas, from Lake Texana and the Lower Colorado. And we're saving ratepayers millions of dollars, because the Lower Colorado River water was purchased from there outright years ago, and we weren't bringing all that water year over year. So now we're maximizing that payment that was made many years ago.
And that's a big switch.
Yeah.
And with these additional water resources, including desal, will we still be in the same situation when desal comes online?
I think we're still going to be pretty close to the same situation. If our western reservoirs don't rebound, hopefully this summer, 36 million gallons, while it is a lot, it's not a tremendous amount. 36 million gallons is about 1/3 of the water that we produce and sell today. But we want to grow as a city, so having some big hotels, having another industrial customer come in, you can see that 36 million gallons would be quickly consumed. So that's why we're not just stopping with the in-harbor desalination project. We actually have permits in for a second site on La Quinta, and TCEQ has already granted one of those 2 permits. And there's other locations at the city council, and we're looking at to include Barney Davis, the Port of Corpus Christi. We know we're trying to partner with them on Harbor Island. So we know that the inner harbor is not it. And what water experts need to do, and leaders, is even before you get that next source online, what's the next one after that? And I think that's what happened here in this city is we didn't move to that next water source after Mary Roads Phase 2 was built quick enough. We didn't move quick enough.
Bill, I'm going to jump in because I think this is a good part of this conversation to bring Kristin in. I love that we're talking about future forward thinking. For the people that are watching, we've been just talking to each other, but I think it's important to recognize, yes, we're in this historically low level, but the question in my mind then becomes, well, why? Why is this happening? Like, why do we need desal? For someone, why do we need desal? Why do we need all these extra sources of water? And that's what really prompted, the research that we've been doing. And I want you to share the info that we had found. We looked back to 2010. We really only looked at Choke Canyon and Lake Corpus Christi. We looked in terms of acre feet, so I know the Mary Roads is now 42,000 acre feet at max capacity coming in, so it's a huge help.
So Mary Roads is more than that. So Mary
getting
Roads,
more, okay.
Mary Roads coming in is 75,000 acres.
Oh, that's 100%. Okay,
So
that would
it's-
be amazing.
Right. So as Peter just described. I mean, the Mary Roads. If you look at what we were pulling in last year, we've almost done a complete flip. Last year, most of our water was coming in from the Nueces River. Now it's the Mary Roads. And I think the other thing that Peter made a point on is that the Colorado River water, somebody had great vision in the city of Corpus Christi decades ago to secure water, to own water on the Colorado River. And that water doesn't cost us anything. We're not paying anything for Colorado River water because we have the water rights for it. The only cost associated with Colorado River water is the pipeline. Of course, we're paying debt on the pipeline and some operational costs to pump it. So I think to the point, leveraging all the water that we already own is a great first step, and we've done that.
Chris, I want you to just share the numbers.
For the consumption?
Just so we went 2010 to 2024, we looked at the total inflow into Choke Canyon, Lake Corpus Christi. We then looked at the evaporation, which was fairly constant, but it's a big chunk. Then we compared that to overall consumption to see where we would be just given those two bodies of water, Choke and Lake Corpus Christi. That's what the drought contingency plan is all based on, so people are going to be more versed to that. And that's where my eyes just kind of went big when I saw just that situation on its own. So share it. Yeah.
So I'll start up here at the top. We, on average, we already talked about the amount of rainfall that we're getting, and over 2010 to 2024, the watershed, those locations like you mentioned, Hondo, Pleasanton, all the way up to Carrizo Springs, that whole area, they do get, on average, most of the rainfall that they usually see in a year, that 25 to 30 inches. So with that and the previous numbers for the Mary Roads pipeline, the 30 to 42,000, the average inflow we found for the Lake Corpus Christi and Choke Canyon combined reservoir from those daily pass-through reports was around 230,000. We took out the evaporation, which on average was 157,000.
These are acre feet.
Yes, acre feet, not
okay.
millions of gallons, yes. So that leaves your available water, like we talked about, at around 75,000 acre feet. And then that's even before the consumption numbers.
That's an average. So we found that on average available water, Choke Canyon, Lake Corpus Christi, after evaporation was about 75,000 acre feet.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's some years obviously that are bigger than that, some that are less. Last year we ranked 12th for the least inflow out of the last 14 to 15 years, and we ranked the least on the evaporation. Even though we were the first warmest year on record, that evaporation was the lowest it's been in the last 15 years, and it was likely because of the humidity raising the temperature, all that stuff.
Very humid last year.
Yeah. So on average, we have been seeing rainfall decreasing over the last 15 years, but we also found at the same time the consumption has been at that same rate. Let's see here. The lake level trend line, I should say, as opposed to the rainfall, the decline of that is twice as steep as I just need to read what's here. I apologize.
There's a lot of we went through a bunch of stuff.
That's a lot of data there.
So the lake level's trend line is nearly twice as steep. It's going down twice as fast as the percent of normal rainfall we're getting. So that is saying that the lake levels are going down faster than the rainfall that we're getting.
And so on top of that, just the big picture numbers, the 75,000 acre feet on average, this is 2010 to 2024. We didn't get into 2025, which is important because we're still in this big drought. It's getting worse, the drought, no doubt getting worse. But after that, the 75,000 acre feet, I wish I had a whiteboard because it would be easier. Maybe we'll put some graphics up later. 75,000 acre feet, you add on then consumption to that, and just between Lake Corpus Christi, Choke Canyon, you're averaging a net loss of about 40,000 acre feet per year on average. Not every year's a loss, you have some gains, but on average, that 15-year span, the average operating is a net loss between Choke Canyon, Lake Corpus Christi. you add in that 42,000 acre feet from Texana, that puts you right up to where you're breaking even, which then what my mind tells me is, okay, if we're just breaking even on a given year on average, there's gotta be more supply, which brings me back to the point where you guys are talking about forward thinking into the future. So my question to you would be, how do you get that message across to someone that's thinking, we don't need another supply of water, we're just selling it all away, we're just, you know, the water, the releases, that's why we're at a loss. Like, how do you communicate that to someone when we know that it's a very delicate balance and we're completely dependent on big rains? How do you, that's just a messaging, it's hard.
That's one, well, Drew has a lot of work on his list there that we talk about, but that is one of the things we have to work more on, which is that communication message. I've been here 6 years, Drew has been here
just over two.
It seems like 4, but so
time flies when you're having fun.
So we're still learning about the system, right? And so what's important though is that we have to develop a simple messaging, because I think, and we appreciate this show here as one other tool to help the community understand our water systems. And it's a tough message to communicate, and easier sound bites resonate with people, like industries using all the water, or we're releasing water into the deltas, and so. But you said it right, Alan, which is that the supply coming out of the 2 western reservoirs, without having massive peaks from a hurricane, the demand on that supply is at a break-even point, or there's somewhat of a deficit. And so years where we were still doing well is when there was a massive hurricane event that filled up those reservoirs. And that's the simple message we have to let people know, that unless they're full to where the boat ramps that you see, water's topping those boat ramps, unless that's happening constantly or consistently, then we do run that delicate balance. And so
in other words, to me, when you say that, my brain says, well, then this is not sustainable over time.
Right.
There's got to be another solution.
And here's what it is, and this is something we do in all of our 29 lines of business. We try to minimize risk. The water system that we have, that we've inherited and that we're leading forward on, is highly risky, high risk in it. If we have these lack of major rain events, like a hurricane, tropical storm, or back-to-back major events, we're right where we are today. And so that's a very risky water system, extremely risky.
And it's a desert. The watershed is in a desert.
Right, and that's why we're here today, and that's why this is why we're not only solving today's issues with bringing in more water from the Mary Roads, looking at groundwater wells, looking at groundwater sources, we're also looking at what's next. We can't just say this Inner Harbor desal plant is it, and once we get that bill, Drew and I are going to take some time off, you know. So we're looking right now at other locations for a second desalination plant, because, as I always say, we want this community to be a great community. We want to grow. Cities that aren't growing become stagnant, and then people leave and they go on a decline. We're competing with cities across the state of Texas for people to come here with talent and families. And if we're not growing, if we don't have resources available to grow, then we're not going to make it. We're not going to progress, and other cities will look more attractive to young professionals that are trying to figure out where do we live, you know?
Earlier you mentioned our neighboring cities to the north.
Right.
Is there an upstream problem? Do we have any issues with cities above us maybe impacting our own water supply?
Yeah, we're gonna work with the Nueces River Authority and maybe some additional river authorities north of us to look further into that. That is a notion that some of our council members have brought to our attention. We know some of our meteorologists are wondering as well. What happens to our recharge zone and inflows is if this upstream taking of that water through development, through aquifers, less flows into our reservoir system. So that is an intriguing question that we need to look at. We know there is development and growth north of here, and it could be, as Drew will talk about here in a moment, there could be some water loss because of that. We don't have extreme evidence that that's happening, but it's something that we want to work with the Nueces River Authority some of the other river authorities to investigate that, to see is this really a phenomenon that might be impacting our resource levels.
Let's talk about the Edwards Aquifer. Recently, I went up for this series. I went up to San Marcos with a group from A&M Corpus Christi, some grad students, and they were looking at the impact the Edwards Aquifer has on us here at home. And one of the things they noticed is that it's not bubbling as much. There's not as much water coming up where that river is born, so to speak. So that was interesting to see, and I know y'all had some questions about that as well.
We're talking about, water resources more north of here. Obviously, explosive development, San Antonio, Austin. You mentioned the I-35 corridor. A lot of that area is pulling from the Edwards Aquifer, which is north of where our runoff would be coming into Choke Canyon, Lake Corpus Christi. I was talking to Bill several days ago about this sponge analogy, right? And like you said, there's no real hard evidence of this, but the way I would think of it in my head is if you have a dry sponge and say that sponge is the Edwards Aquifer, you pour water onto it, that water is going to soak up into the sponge and not really, run off, so to speak, onto the table around it. Whereas if you have a wet sponge, soaking wet sponge, a full aquifer, you pour water onto that, and the water's not going into that sponge, all of a sudden it's going all over the table into the tributaries. And I feel like that may be something that we're seeing upstream with the Edwards Aquifer being so dry. I think they're one of the driest on record. It's April 17th. They're one of the lowest levels there on record. So could that be one of the reasons we're seeing the inflow having a harder time getting into Choke, Lake Corpus Christi, what's happening north of us?
Yeah.
I would say there has to be some element of truth to that, because we know that, as you just said, Bill, the Edwards Aquifer is a massive aquifer, and San Antonio depends on the Edwards Aquifer for a part of its supply, and that from what I understand, stage 3 is what has been defined because of the level of that Edwards Aquifer for some cities in and around that area. So it's extreme drought, and I would say that as Peter just described, it's really important that we have some interaction and some engagement with the Nueces River Authority, for example, because they really are tasked with making sure that perhaps some of these things that we're talking about, we have a lot of growth, people are moving out in these areas. Is there some interceding of that water from being able to make its way to the Nueces River just by people doing things as they're living out there in that space? Those are things that we should be talking to the Nueces River Authority and others to make sure that there is not some kind of diversion that's happening, or unintended diversion that's happening where this water is not making its way into the Nueces River.
I want to switch gears now and ask about broken pipes. How much do those failing pipes contribute to our water loss, and what kind of work has been done to fix them? I know there are some cities out there who lose 30% of their water due to leaks. So what is our number compared to maybe other cities?
I would tell you, I've had some experience working in a large city, I'll just say Houston, and Houston has a lot of challenges with soil that moves, and so there's a lot of water loss associated with pipelines and water lines breaking. Down here, and I think the city manager can articulate this well, because I think we have had a tremendous success in really raising the level of financial commitment to replacing water lines. It's not an easy thing to do, and we're contributing more to water line replacement today than we were a number of years ago. And so because of that financial commitment, we're seeing very, very low water loss numbers, lower than many other communities across the state. And so as we continue to have the commitment from our leadership team, certainly our city council understands that importance. With those kind of things that are happening, we're seeing really low water loss numbers. So 7.5% is what we have been reporting to the Texas Water Development Board. I'm not trying to say, but Houston's up around 20%. So we're less than half of what the water loss is in some of these. And Houston's not alone. There's other big cities that are struggling with this. But I think when you have the fact that we've got the financial commitment to it, we've got a very skilled CC Corpus Christi water team. We can do a lot of our own repairs. We, of course, outsource some of it to contractors, but we generally have 0 to 1 water main breaks a day. When you look at Houston, they're averaging 35 to 50 water main breaks a day. And so that level of commitment, I think, is really tremendous from our leadership here in the city of Corpus Christi.
Very good. Let's talk seawater desalination. If we want to see our population grow over the next 20 years, how critical is bringing desal to our area?
Yeah, I think the answer is it's extremely critical. And to follow up on what we were saying prior to this last couple of questions, this city and leaders in the city have to constantly be ready to adjust our water system. And so it could be that Choke Canyon and Lake Corpus Christi, that used to be the breadwinners for us for our water system, the workhorses for our water system, it could be that they no longer are in the future. And so we can't just sit back and say that's the water source, that's all we're going to ever think about. So bringing on and adjusting and being nimble in our business, that's something we constantly have to do across all our businesses, including water, especially water. So it could be that the western reservoirs aren't going to help us in the future as much as they did decades ago. So bringing on more water sources, and right now the Inner Harbor desal plant and that water source from experts across the world, 6 years ago and most recently at 2 water forums with City Council, overwhelmingly said, Corpus Christi, your best next water source is desalination. There are hundreds and hundreds of plants across the globe, across the world. This technology, this way to make water is not new, and many countries rely on it exclusively. Texas is watching us. The states outside of Texas, the country and the world are watching us, because I think a lot of cities are going to start relying on either brackish desalination or seawater desalination. So for us, it's been demonstrated by professionals, not just us saying it, but professionals from a lot of different water companies, a lot of different backgrounds, that this is a great next source for us, and it's critical to bring on that more water. Right.
You know, we heard the governor, of course, say that he's making water funding a top priority this session. Is desal our saving grace?
I think it is. The other sources that we have available right now are groundwater, and in this region is brackish. And so to set up a treatment plant on a big ranch and take the salt out of the water and then pipe it over here, miles and miles, by the time you do all that, it's almost as expensive as desal. And we're paying high royalty prices to somebody that owns these water rights, or so once we build the plant, the water is free, and then you just treat it to remove that salt. So
let me ask this: what would happen to Corpus Christi if we don't get desal?
We would be in trouble. Yeah, we would be in extreme trouble. This is a plan that has been in the work for, we hear different numbers of years, but I would say for at least a decade. This has been the city's path forward. This has been the source, that next water source that we know we needed 10 years ago, when we said, okay, we got to think about another water source. And the city 10 years ago said, I think we're going to do Inner Harbor, or not Inner Harbor, I think we're going to focus on desalination, seawater desalination. And so this is a culmination of 10 years worth of work. And so to say we're not going to do that would be detrimental.
I was just going to say, Bill, I think if you were to ask some other cities that have done desal, I'll give you an example. Santa Barbara, the mayor of Santa Barbara, her name is Helene Schneider. I've spoken to her several times. She would tell you that in Santa Barbara, their saving grace was desal. Santa Barbara is the city that coined Earth Day. Earth Day, there is a tremendous commitment to environmental stewardship, especially in Santa Barbara, just like we have here in our city. And so hearing somebody like Mayor Helene Schneider talk about how she resurrected a mothballed desal plant in Santa Barbara on the eve of their major drought that they had in the 2012-13 timeframe is really quite astounding to hear her talk about it. And it's not just her. You talk to folks in Tampa Bay where they have a 25 million gallon a day desal plant. They'll tell you that they built desal in Tampa Bay to help with the environmental impact of over pumping groundwater in the Tampa Bay area. So when you look at these communities, you talk to folks in Israel, you talk to folks in the Middle East where they don't have water like we have, water supplies like surface water and lakes and groundwater for that matter. These are a major need. Without it, humans can't exist. And so I think for us, it's equally important to have that extra leg on the stool. And I think the point really is that this is a really critical project for our community. And I think a big part of it too, it's not the only one, but this is a major critical stool.
My question on top of that, you talk about the environmental aspect of putting desalination into our bay, our inner harbor.
Right.
How do you respond to there's going to be pushback, it's a huge thing. How do you respond to someone that's saying maybe something along the lines of, well, we did all these releases for 50 years to try to keep the salinity at a certain level. Now we're going to have all this extra salt out there. I feel like it's going to be a question that comes up at some point. How do you respond to that? What's the response to that pushback?
Yeah, and those are comments and questions that we get a lot when we go to community engagement events, and we appreciate those questions because I'll be the first to tell you, when I moved down here a couple years ago, and my wife's from this community, nobody wants to do anything that's going to adversely impact the environment. But I was asking the same questions. And I'll tell you, I think really the important part of this is that our bay has a natural salinity range of anywhere between 22 and 44 parts per thousand. So that our bay is very vibrant and it has the ability to adapt. And when you look at the modeling, and there has been a ton of modeling that's been done, on this project, 400 meters from the diffuser, we're looking at about a 1.3 parts per thousand increase in salinity. And we started looking at this project with coastal marine ecologists and marine biologists to make sure that all the sensitive species were going to be protected and what would that number be? And so we kind of worked backwards. And so 1.3 parts per thousand increase within 400 meters. And then as that salty water starts to expand out, it gets gradually less. Over time, there's going to be an impact of we've calculated about 0.6 parts per thousand increase, which when you look at the total range of salinity in our bay, 22 to 44, or about that is a very low number, and certainly a number that is within the tolerance of the species that are living, the marine species that are living in that ecosystem. So I will tell you, there is a minimal impact, and we have done a ton of work, and frankly, the science has been presented to a number of regulatory agencies. So this was a hurdle that had to be overcome by talking to TCEQ, the EPA, U.S. Wildlife and Fisheries, Texas Parks and Wildlife. There was a host of federal agencies that had to look at this to ensure that the environmental science would be proven out.
I have a couple more questions before we wrap up, and these questions come from the community. These are questions we get from folks who watch us, and one of those is, would that water from the desal that's processed through the desal go to industry, or would it be used by everyone?
Right.
I'll tell you this, this water goes to the navigation pump station, and that water at navigation pump station, actually, we've modeled it. It goes to industry, it goes to commercial businesses, it goes to the residential community. So the water goes to all of the customers that we currently serve today. So it's water that is absolutely going to be for our residential community, our commercial business community, and there will be industry that will benefit from this. But what I would also say is probably most importantly is we have a second standalone water treatment plant that will help the one and only water treatment plant that we have today. And I think the city manager hit the nail on the head when he said, we look at this with risk. And so when we think about the fact that we only have one water treatment plant and we're a regional provider of water, we need to have a second treatment plant. We have one Mary Road pipeline. Those are conditions that we think about a lot because there is some risk involved. And so we want to make sure that our community has less risk when it comes to water. And that's why we think that this water treatment plant, the Inner Harbor Desalination Plant, is so important from a risk standpoint because it diversifies our water supply, but it also adds a second independent water treatment plant.
Another question I get from the community is the cost. Could that cost impact their home. I spoke with Dr. Robert Mace with Texas State a couple of days ago, and he told me the days of cheap water are basically over, and he said the cost of no water is far greater. But will desalinated water be more expensive for water customers, and how much are we talking about?
Yeah, there will be a rate, without any doubt, there will be a rate impact to all customer classifications. And, but it is minimized by several things, like the state helping us with the loans that we're issuing. That'll save us $130 million over the life of the project. That's tremendous on rate savings. It's brought down by cash resources from large volume users who are paying a surcharge fee of 31 cents for every 1,000 gallons they use. That generates about $6 million nowadays. That's going directly towards the construction costs. We have a few grants into the federal government as well that would be non-repayable, so that could help lower the impact. But I think the main answer is this: is that across the country, I don't think there's any water bills that are going down. The sources of cheap, inexpensive water are all used up at this point, and so most cities, especially growing cities in Texas, are seeing rate increases to deliver more water, to keep water systems safe and operable. Our job is to minimize that impact, and that's what we focus on pretty much every day. We're trying to find the most efficient, most economical systems that have a less of a rate impact. But without any doubt, rates will continue to increase over time. It's that reduction in that rate increase is what we're focused on.
It seems like just basic economics. You
Yeah.
know, you've got more growth,
Right.
you're going to put more strain on what is a natural resource, and that isn't mirroring the growth. So there's going to have to be some changes there. And you know, when supply is low and demand is high, that product, the cost of it, right,
Yeah.
starts to come back up. So yeah.
Final thoughts?
Well, I'll start and I'll let Peter
Yeah.
finish. But look, the opportunity to sit down with y'all and talk about water is an opportunity that I really appreciate. And you know, just having you, Bill, especially you, because you travel with us on some of these trips, like we went to go look at the Colorado River.
That's right.
So being able to convey this information, I think it's so important that the community understands and sees what it is that we're doing on a daily basis. We recognize that there are some challenges here, and we're working really hard to make sure that water supply is not going to be something that is going to be an issue for us, because we know how important water is to our community, to any community. And these are some really big projects, and big projects take time to implement. You know, as Peter was just describing earlier, I mean, the desal project has been in the books. People have been talking about this for over a decade. And frankly, the state of Texas is looking to Corpus Christi as a beacon for solving some fairly challenging water supply challenges today. And so that's why the state of Texas has believed in us. They've provided us, we had to compete for it, but they provided us with the entire project funding through low interest financing. That's not something that comes easy. And so the state of Texas has a vested interest that we deliver this project successfully. And so I feel like we have done a pretty darn good job in terms of, you know, meeting all the milestones. The project is moving forward as we've planned it to, and as the community should expect it to.
Peter, Drew?
Yeah, I would say, you know, this, we do appreciate, as Drew said, being on here, because this is a very complex subject and complex system. And this is a city operation. In some cities, like San Antonio, their water system is a separate entity altogether, separate board of directors, separate, they're not city staff members. So this is one of, if not the city's most important and most significant services that we provide. And it's not just to Corpus Christi, it's to a 7-county region. Over 500,000 people rely on us every day. And so I would say to that having more of these forums and having the community try to get more engaged through their own means to learn about this water system. We have increased the amount of knowledge and access to information in the past 6 years well beyond what we ever had before. So our website has tremendous amount of information. Even our brand, Corpus Christi Water, finally we have a name. When I first got here 6 years ago, it was called the Utilities Department. And so we have a name, we have a brand, we have a great set of employees that work for this community every day, both in water treatment, water delivery, and wastewater management. Those employees are really helping this community with the basic necessity that we all need. And the final thought is this, is that having consistency on city council and staff and the city manager, I think helps in a complex situation like this. It's taken me many years just to really figure out this water system. And so having that knowledge and expertise and having staff and leadership and mayors and city council that are around for a long time help to bring on more sources of water and become nimble if we have to, if water sources are changing as we're seeing today. So yeah, that would be my final thoughts for this show here. Yes, sir.
Well, thank you both for
Yeah.
joining us for this conversation, and it is a conversation that will continue.
Good.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, y'all.